thinks he's converted. The Jew cannot convert, but he thinks he's converted, he became a goy, which includes, of course, every Jew who is Mechal Shabbos. On his own, he's complete Mechal Shabbos. You're not allowed to tell this Jew to do anything for you on Shabbos. Not only that, but you can't even tell him, or you're allowed to tell a goy, you can't even tell this Jew who still is a Jew. Yisrael, Shechota Yisrael. He still carries the title Jew, and though he himself would do it, do the Aveda, but you're not allowed to tell him, because that's the Eved. We didn't say to mislead him. Mislead means that he thinks if you tell him it's permissible, even though he does it himself. So it's forbidden to tell a mumar at any time to do something on Shabbos, even when we're allowed to tell him right. Allowed to ride in a wagon on Shabbos that's pulled by animals, horses, or to ride a horse itself. For two reasons. One, you're not allowed to use an animal on Shabbos. The use of an animal on Shabbos is forbidden. Secondly, to ride a horse, there is the Zeda. Zeda is a chum that you might break off a branch from a tree and use it to whip the horse. Therefore, it is forbidden too. So in case you're riding in a coach that is driven by a guy, where there's no problem about your whipping the horse, there's no good at all, you are still having hana under the use of an animal, which is awesome. And this brings up, of course, the question that people should think about and ponder. How is it possible today for any Jew, any religious Jew, any Shemesh Shabbos today, to own a dog? It's a big question, very big question. It's a very difficult one to answer. You have to be Damakav Schus. Jews who say that the dog becomes invisible on Shabbos. A dog is an animal that is muktzah. You cannot touch the dog or hold the leash of the dog, lead the dog by the leash. The leash is held upwards. You take the dog out into the street, presumably that the dog will not wait till after Shabbos to do its natural tendencies. And Bechlal, not to make any physical contact with a dog, is 24 hours or more, seems impossible. In any event, even if a person was that strict with the dinner, it's difficult not to forget and inadvertently touch the dog, or the dog jumps on a person. So that it seems impossible for a religious Jew to own a dog and have this dog held in the house, kept in the house on Shabbos. Since the dog is muktzah, there's no logical way that a person can really observe this din with this kind of animal. That is why, an additional reason why a good Jewish home should not have a dog in it. The question of, on Shabbos, if you're allowed to pay the Rav or the Chazan whose duties are discharged only on Shabbos. To hire a Chazan to daven, there are some shuls that have to hire Chazanim. We get ours free, of course. They're not as good. There are some who actually pay the privilege of sitting or listening to the Chazan for a long davening. And this Chazan is paid his wages, his salary is paid for services that are done only on Shabbos. Halacha Shabbos, which he gets paid. The question is, how can a person work on Shabbos and earn money on Shabbos alone? So it did say that it is best if a Chazan was hired to daven on Shabbos and on the weekdays together. Combined, it is permissible. However, what about Baltikeya? There are some Baltikeyas who was going to get paid on Rosh Hashanah. This is only that you can't have him hire him to blow shofar on Sukkot or on Pesach too. Then it says that in the case of a Chazan or a Baltikeya, or even, let's say, a Rav, it's a mitzvah. This is an item which is a mitzvah, and this is considered a shvus to shvus, therefore it is permissible. The Shari Tshuva says the best solution is, the Eitz all the days, is to take on this Rav or the Chazan for nothing, no pay at all, as is common in many places, and then you give him a gift afterwards. So the salary is in the form of a gift, not as schar Shabbos. You know how the law, you can't make it for Shabbos on the weekdays, then you make it in the form of a free service, you give the chazan a gift, but of course he goes on a strike for a raise in gifts. But this way it is permissible for so-called schar Shabbos. We should be zoked to the real schar Shabbos. Shabbos is also lovely. Zoked to the schar of Haba, the Yamedu. Another time we should see this. Here she calls Shabbos with the coming of the Shir, the Kedel, the Hegel, the Yamedu. Okay, Shabbos. It is that any type of discussion, even words, let alone actions, Halacha is also, but there's also an idea of speaking on Shabbos, only words of Kedusha and words of Chayil are also. For example, to talk words of business, not to do business, not to actually transact, but to speak words of business is also. And the reason is actual Isa Rabbanan, because the reason is Zayda, that he might write it down. He might forget and write it down, break the major Halacha. Therefore, the Chacham Lageza that any kind of words of business, Masamat is also on Shabbos. And this is included when we say Shamdu Lagadnu. We say it daily, we say it in Yom Kippur, the Teshuva, the Barnu Daifi that we spoke. And this includes the Barnu Dive Masa Umaton V'Shabbos V'Yimtan. The person dared to speak words of business on Shabbos and Yimtan. There's only those words that are permissible to speak on Shabbos, business that pertains to Shabbos, that is mutter. Now, for example, you have cases where they sell the aliyahs. The aliyahs are auctioned off. You have that on Yom Kippur. Especially Yom Kippur, they auction the aliyahs off. You have it on Simchas Torah. And in some shuls they have it every Shabbos. They auction off the maftir, so they certainly do that. So the shaila is that auctioning is actually doing business. The Marshal says that selling the aliyahs, auctioning them, is comparable to Masa Matan, and therefore it is osir. But since it is done, Marshal says, then how wonderful is the meaning of those in this city that when they go for auctions on Shabbos or Yontif, let's say one person gives $5, the second offers 10, the third offers 15, and the final bid is 20, the 20 wins, the other three pay off their bid also. Each one pays the amount that he bid, because it was like a neder for tzedakah. If they don't pay it, then it means that it was pure business. They all pay it, then it becomes visible. The meaning is, though, as is obvious, the meaning is that they are makil in this item, since the entire thing is for the sake of mitzvah, and where there is an union of mitzvah, this is a shvus to shvus, lock a mitzvah, and that's why it is permissible to do this. If possible, of course, a person who offers a bid and then gives the amount that he offered to tzedakah, even though he did not win the auction itself, then naturally he's investing his money in a very good cause. Giving money for tzedakah, b'chlal, is an excellent item. Now, at the aliyah, sometimes the person says that he's menagev, he contributes to tzedakah, to shul, a certain amount of money. That is permissible. You're allowed to make an appeal for money, and people to pledge money, and a person should say, of course, to give money itself, that's tzedakah. You cannot say offering to give a certain item, like one who's makdish a sefer Torah. He offers to give a sefer Torah because that means he's making it hektish. And that is only if he says sefer Torah zu. He has to say this sefer Torah I give to the shul. It's being makdish this to the shul, and makdish on Shabbos is awesome. But to say stam is going to offer the sefer Torah to the shul, shiva, that is permissible. But it's most important, this is most vital for everyone to know, that the most shuls, very sadly, tragically, they are unaware of a major issa. It is forbidden for a person to say that he gives a neder. A neder, even for a mitzvah, is also. So when a person Shabbos makes a Mishaveda Ba'avur Shenodar, or on Yom Kippur, or at the time when they say Yiska, the person himself says, Yiska Lekim Ba'avur Sha'ani Neder V'Tzedakah, to make Neder V'Tzedakah, that is Osir, the Hechlan. So what a person should say is Ba'avur Sha'ani Etain V'Tzedakah B'li Neder. That's the correct way. And the Shabbos making Mishaveda say Ba'avur Sha'yitain B'li Neder, $11 left, whatever amount he's giving. So you should say, Baruch Yitain, not Sheneder, Yitain B'lineder. This is the proper way. The person should be very cautious, extremely so, to avoid falling into this Isra, where the Gemara says it's like building a bomber to Avodah Zarah, Chas v'Shalom. Not to make any kind of neder. Of course, Rabbi Nachman, if you recall, used to make the Gorim, and also I'll ask him about this Gemara, he says, don't make the Gorim. And he'll say that this applies to Shlomo Zalmagus. Characters who don't know what making you better is and how to keep it. For them, this goes. In the days he uses, the Gemara says it's mutter for those who are PMS, tzadikim is reason. But for ordinary people, below par, like, they must be careful never to say the word neder for anything. To say Moshe Feinstein to lead neder, even when they are continuing to stuff. The mitzvah stuff b'shleimus, mitzvah Shabbos b'shleimus, and the sealing of b'shleimus Eila, mitzvah holy to it. This week we're going to start with our best. We want to complete a little more about the Shabbos. So today's shir is Hilchos Shabbos. The last thing we discussed was the Isser of Matzah Matan, which means Dibur b'Shabbos. Daber Tazov, the Gemara says, the words you speak on Shabbos should not be the same as the words you speak in weekdays. In Yaakov, Noyeg, that he spoke only Lashon Kodesh on Shabbos. Anything that he said Lashon Kodesh. Aside from the fact that there was no government ever spoken by the Arizal, but even the Sichas Chulin, too, whatever was necessary, was said the Lashon Kodesh. Even the Arizal lived in itself. The language of Lashon Kodesh, but in many cases, of course, the language then was Arabic. You judge by any Syrians, any Spanish, or the Israelis of the Middle East, you find that they spoke the hundreds of Arabic. In fact, Israel was in Egypt, so the language was Arabic. The Arizal was also from Damascus. Very practical effect. Still, on Shabbos, there had to be a difference, separation between the words of Shabbos and the words of the weekdays. Aside from the fact that there was nothing said except for the Torah, but the words of Shabbos have high kedusha. So, therefore, there is a difference. Wow. The reason, of course, is that Masal Matan, business is also on Shabbos. Why are words of business also? We're afraid that we might bring to writing on Shabbos, which already is a Halacha d'Oraisa. Now, measuring also, take yardstick, measure anything. Measure could be, of course, length, or area, space, or it could be measuring weights. Measuring on Shabbos is also not to weigh things and measure things, except where it is for the sake of a mitzvah. For example, you have to have the item of food. It happened that in the period of the East, something kosher fell into a pot of Shabbos food, as we showed. In order to know if this food is kosher, in order to determine its kashrus, you know that whenever there is Isur, in certain cases, requires majority of kosher. Some cases require 60 times as much. In order to know, you have to measure it. Measure, weigh, and so forth. This kind of measuring is permissible. By mitzvah, you need it for the food for Shabbos. Well, measure that for Shabbos. Same thing too, you have to know about mikveh. Mikveh is kosher only if it has 40 saw. 40 saw is a certain measurement. Saw is 6 kavod, so forth. This 40 saw is the minimum amount required for mikveh, and we have that very solidly in food and the markets of the world. Very solid. But in order to be kosher, it's a very big difference between kosher or not. A woman is coming to follow, but she goes to mikveh. If there's mikveh, there's a stomach whether there's 40 saw million in it, you're allowed to measure that on Shabbos. Mitzvah. Same thing, there's also a mitzvah in helping a sick person. So to take a person's temperature with a thermometer, the person is sick, or a person is suspected of being sick, it is permissible to take the temperature on Shabbos. That's called the Didor Shel Mitzvah. No question about that. And, of course, the question is, what about the fact that a sick person, indeed you cannot help a sick person, in any case of medicine, aspirins, drugs, the other type of medication is also on Shabbos. You're not allowed to give any kind of medicine to a chila on Shabbos unless he is seriously ill, unless he's in danger, not a life or death. Otherwise, there's no necessity. Otherwise, you're not allowed to use any medicine on Shabbos. Like this, isn't that a mitzvah? The answer is that it's true. There is a zayda, or shchika, tfino, which is the nicer. This is the nicer. That zayda, only by items of food. Only was a matter of plasma, mishka, food and drink. Initially, thermometer, we are not afraid that you might eat the thermometer. Or it might pull in some salt or caffeine on it and eat it. There's no question that it's not going to mishka. The thermometer, for the sake of the Torah, is definitely mutter. Now, the opinion of not allowed to speak about business. How about if you don't speak about something? How about if you think about it? A person with Shabbos is allowed to think about his business. Business matters. He's not doing anything. He's not speaking anything. Thought alone. Gemara says, Ibur Asur, Inhur Mutter. Ibur is forbidden to speak. Thought is permissible. But we find, though, permissible as far as Shabbos is concerned. You find there are certain items where thought itself is a sin in the thinking alone. In Huda, Kosher in Huda, Aveda, Me Aveda. The thought of the sin is worse than the sin sometimes. In this case, the thought itself is permissible, but next one is wow. It counteracts this heta. This says, Shesha Shem V'tas Malacha, Sisa Kol V'Achtecha. 6 days you should work to do all your work, complete all your work. You want to ask, is it possible for a person to complete all the work in 6 days? There's always something left over. Always something has to be completed. The answer is that when Shabbos comes, you want us to consider all your work that have been completed. There's not one trace of any kind of work left for you to do. When Shabbos comes, everything is completed, done, finished, and now start with Shabbos Ducha and nothing else. You're going to think about this is the means you've left something undone. You're not doing the mitzvah of your sisa kol v'achtecha. That's a mitzvah in the Asayim. Therefore, that too should be considered. Should be considered asur, or it is not the mitzvah. Though there is a heta, should be mutter. There is not the mishnah's chassidut. Not what a good Jew should do. Avoid any thoughts of business whatsoever. There is one item which is permissible, with Shabbos. Chilul Shabbos, which is permissible for the sake of the mitzvah, it is so important that the Chachamim allow this. A person wants to buy a house. Buy a house is a mitzvah or is it a sin? The person has to live. Has to have a place to live, and the place to live requires a home. He has a choice of renting a house or buying one. So it is very clear that buying a house in Chutz La'aretz, a person who lives outside of Eretz Yisrael buys a house, that person is committing a wrong. We don't want to condemn the thousands and thousands of Jews who buy homes here in these neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Jersey, fancy section, Catalonia, places where the wealthier elite purchase expensive residences, homes, below and so on. However, even if a person is very wealthy, at least he should try to avoid buying a home. You know what it says? The Tikuney lived in tents. They were wealthy and lived in tents. Why? Because they were the midbar. They were outside of Israel. They said, as long as we are in Golis, we want to be prepared at a moment's notice to shed what we have to move to Israel. Now, the person who buys a house here usually says, okay, Mashiach comes, all right, we'll forfeit the house. We'll make the grand sacrifice, leave the house over in Golis and go. However, it's easier said than done. The fact is that the person really expected Mashiach, he wouldn't establish such solid roots. You're ready to move, you don't buy a home and furnish it so well. You rent a house and let the landlord worry about it when Mashiach comes. You move on to Israel where you have a nachla, you have an inheritance there. Therefore, it is advisable for a person to buy a home with his daughters, even if he is a multi-millionaire. Rent the nicest one. But have your passport ready, the car with the motor warmed up, with the car headed in the direction of the airport, so you get your cloud going to floating to Israel. However, it says that the person buying a house in Israel, there is a mitzvah. Purchase of land in Israel, buy it from a sticky until finding the goy. Buy it back from the goy to redeem it from the goy, that is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to save the land and get it back from the goy. Surely an Isur to give any land, an inch of land in Israel, to give it to the goyim, the Arabs are not Talmud Bavly, to give seed 1 single inch of land. West Bank, East Bank, Manufacturers Bank, any part of land there, no matter where it is, if it's in Israel, that is Kaddish, it belongs to the Am Yisrael, the Israel. Therefore, the saving of land, which means land which is owned by an Arab, a Jew has a chance to buy this land from an Arab, buy a home from an Arab. This mitzvah is so big that he can actually make this purchase on Shabbos. Buy Masul on Shabbos? Yes. But how can you have Masul? How can you buy a house? Who's going to buy a house without a contract written up? A house requires a contract. It requires writing. Then it says, mitzvah of buying a house, and then it just, it's so big. The Aharon said, go, man, go. Let them write on Shabbos too. Mitzvah to buy a house, allowed to have a goy write on Shabbos. The shvus is not the mitzvah. Aharon themselves, Asad, only the Masamat, they themselves are Pesha, Osad or Pesha. They said it is permissible for the sake of the mitzvah. It's so gigantic a mitzvah to save the land of Israel for the Jews, to redeem it, get it back. The Aharon allowed such steps. Masamat, purchasing a home in Israel and writing it. This was in those days, it then applies today too. Today too, a person today, the 20 cat that want to buy a house for the Arabs, if they have a contract written on Shabbos today, like a Kiddush, the fact that they have one for the children. Which means that for the children too. Thinking of which means effort to fulfill these, of course, go together, Shabbos, Kiddush, and Teshuva, these are all the negative levels of Kedusha, which means effort to Kayin, mitzvahs, Shabbos, which are very complex. Effort to the Yom Shekuli Shabbos, Yom Avias and Mashiach, will have back our land, Eretz Yisrael, permanently, forever afterwards, evict permanently all the illegal settlers, all the banks of Eretz Yisrael will take over the Jordanian Bank, Bank of Jordan, which was taken in the 67 war, and get it back to them, Jamal Islam which kept leaders. Because we will then have the leaders will have the Mashiach kingdom, whom we hope to see now. Wealthy children now, see they just straight up make it. Rabbi I have one thing more. Today we hope Shabbos. We're discussing the items on Shabbos that are forbidden, which are Isa de Rabbanan. For example, talking, saying words that are forbidden, telling a good to do malachos. Items that are also because of Gezeda to avoid a more strict Isa, severe Isa than Isa. And then says, the Gemara tells us that if Chas v'Shalom, in those days this took place. And of course, nowadays, we see it now at time too, by our generation also pogroms. The Gemara says that if the Goyim came and took captive a person's daughter, Chas v'Shalom, in order to convert her, crusaders came to convert her, Chas v'Shalom, to their religion, then a person is allowed to go outside of the boundary of the city to pursue this band, to attempt to rescue his daughter. Only outside of the city is an Isa de Rabbanan, but converting is Chas v'Shalom a major Isa. It says that the person should commit a small sin in order to save a Jew from committing a major sin. This may be done. This is only, of course, if they are coercing her, they're forcing her to convert. If one has a daughter, Chas v'Shalom, who's left her parents' home at her own volition, join up with conversions. They have Aharon today, Jews, Shmuel, Yeshu, hippies, and so on. He's not allowed to commit the tiniest sin in order to save those children that leave their own volition of Aharon. Now, this is because there's a major sin being committed. Please can ask, we have a klal at in also which says that if you're going to want to force a Jew to commit a sin, major sin, and you're not allowed to try to save him on Shabbos. You're not being Chal Shabbos to save him. So, the place can differentiate between the two, show the difference, in that where the major sin is being committed but just at one time, you're going to want to make a Jew commit a major sin, just that one time, and then let him go. Another Jew cannot allowed to commit a small sin. You cannot commit a small sin to save another Jew from a major sin. But if it's a question of all time to convert his daughter, something like that, there it's so major a sin, so repeated so many times, in a matter of a lifetime, Chas v'Shalom, there he is allowed to commit a sin. Ordinarily, Gemara says that a person, Halacha is a person, if one Jew cannot say, I'll save another Jew from committing a sin by doing a small sin. You cannot commit a sin that Rabbanan to save a second Jew from a sin that I said. You have no right to be able any kind of an Aveda, unless it is extenuating circumstances, where, as I explained, things that are, let's say, a long series of sins that will be saved by this one single act. There too, a person must weigh very carefully. It says be very careful not to compare this to something else, to anywhere else. You must have a definite guidance before a person is actually told he may go out and commit a sin. Getting on a horse, riding a horse on Shabbos is also getting on a horse and going out pursuing this band to rescue, to save his daughter. That is allowed only because of this special item. Plus the getting on a horse and going out to war, if the Jews are being attacked, eventually if there is Chas v'Shalom an actual physical attack by the enemy against a Jewish village or a Jewish city, in Israel or even in the ghettos, Islam, then surely all Jews may take up arms to defend themselves in the Chal Shabbos. That is understood. Even if they did not come to attack to kill, even if they came to rob and plunder, Jews are also allowed to do the Chal Shabbos. That's just a matter of self-defense. And the greatest self-defense, of course, is offense. Someone comes to attack you, be faster, quicker than him, rush to attack him, destroy him before he has a chance to act. Therefore, the din that on Shabbos, Isa de Rabbanan, and some places that I saw may be overlooked, always for the sake of of saving, rescuing the mitzvah of Shabbos. Therefore, too, the person is very ill on Shabbos. We say that it is permissible to do Challah Shabbos for that person. The reason is not to Mechalel Shabbos, but for the sake of Chilul Shabbos, for the sake of kiruv Shabbos. If you Mechalel Shabbos now and save that person's life, rather than let him die, if he dies, you kill the mitzvah of Shabbos today. And if you save his life, by being Mechalel Shabbos, you have Mechalel one Shabbos. But many more Shabbos will be kept by this person because you saved his life. You should be zechet to be in this, we carry the mitzvahs, Ava, got with the Shabbos and see the Yerushalmi Shabbos, Julas, Ridu, this is the also Shabbos, Easter, Shabbos of speaking words that are not Kedusha, words that are not fit to speak on Shabbos, one of the Talmud, which should not be spoken, but there is also a case of an actual Easter. There are many people who are with this, they are not aware of it, or they forget themselves. They get the discussions. This is topic of business. Business or one's work. It's naturally the person brings up the item of business or work when speaking to his friend because he is so accustomed to it during the week. He doesn't feel he's doing anything wrong because he's wearing Shabbos clothes, sitting at a Shabbos table or sitting in a shul. They get to this conversation during Shabbos, and this is an absolute Isra. In fact, to prove it, you see that we have Chet Shechatanol V'necha the Masel Mat M'Shabbos. Speaking Masel Mat M'Shabbos, business or work is awesome. There are things too that are awesome. For example, reading a newspaper. Item which looks like business is usher because of Exelis Chachamim. It is you're not allowed to read Shtare and Yotis, contracts, business contracts. To read those on Shabbos is usher. Now there are certain items which are Exelis. For example, a person even does something which is a mitzvah. He invited guests to his home, or for a kiddush, and he has a list of guests, and he has a list of food. So it is also to read that list on Shabbos because we're afraid that he might make a ticket. He might erase some of the guests. He decided this guest is unwanted, and therefore X him off the list. Or this item of food is too expensive, let's cut down on it. Therefore, all this is also because he might read the Shtari Hadyotis. He might allow this, he might read regular business contracts. It is also to read letters. Mail. You cannot read mail. You cannot reread mail. Letters, regular friendly letters, correspondence cannot be reread on Shabbos. Only one that you have not read yet. You don't know what's in it. Therefore, there's always the possibility of an emergency or some very important news. You're allowed to read a letter that you have not read yet. But you cannot reread a letter. And even that one should be read, special halacha should be read without moving your lips. In other words, with your eyes and mind only. There are letters that come by mail from out of town, which means that there's a chilul Shabbos in bringing them from out of town, even though it may have been a goy. Those could not be. There's a shalaf they are muktzah. They're allowed to be touched. So a lot of persons say that it's also, but however, the consensus of opinion, final decisions, they're allowed to handle them. It's best though that to have the guy put it down on the table. He brings it, deliver it, not to take it out yourself. And if you think it's important and it's permissible, tell the guy that you cannot open the letter. You're not allowed to say directly, open it for me. You could tell him, I cannot read a letter myself, I can't open it, and the guy will understand, unless you get a real grubber cup guy, will understand by this implication that expected of him to open the mail for you. Then a person is allowed to read. But this too should be avoided if possible, unless it's a matter of extreme importance, emergency, or shayach to cover Shabbos Yontif. One more item, there are pictures on the walls in a museum, for instance. A person goes to a museum on Shabbos, he sees these big, large paintings on the walls. It is forbidden to read the title of these paintings. For instance, Whistler, Rembrandt. The words under the paintings are forbidden. This may sound strange, but it is a clear Isser in Shulchan. Again, because of the Gzeda, that if you allow reading these things, what is that any better? Especially paintings today. In general, paintings are a phenomenon. How people can be that taken in by something which is so worthless. A painter, a so-called artist, draws a picture, and especially today scribbling, which you do much better if you let your little child do it, the so-called modern art, which is putting over the greatest hoax possible in the world. And when people pay heavy money, they pay enough money when you can put up a billion in yeshiva for Hamdil. The price they pay for one painting, one Rembrandt, pay nothing for some of these famous insane people in the past who drew pictures. So he drew a picture. You have better talent today than he was. Plus the fact that if you want a picture, why don't you look at the best, the most natural, the most normal, and much greater art, the camera. You want a picture. Certainly a camera takes a much better picture than this artist does. Much clearer, much better focus. Some of these cameras today come out so clear, practically natural. The person wants to really stand and admire nature, trees, grass, and so forth, the sky, clouds. Better than a painting, better than a picture, stand and admire the original. Look at the sky and the clouds and admire the Creator. How great is the act of Hashem who created all this? This is original, this is real, this is tangible, it's alive, it's actual. Not to go for these paintings, and therefore the paintings themselves on Shabbos are a devachel. The person shouldn't be taken in by it, fooled. In any event, if he does look at these paintings, then it is forbidden to read the words underneath. The person should be kaddish himself completely from the Shabbos Kodesh. We can to this kedusha of the Torah, and thereby see these Muslim right up. Okay, Shabbos continued. Up to the dinner, the Gzeiras de Rabbanan, we said you're not allowed to read anything which is weekday matter and not Shabbos, because of Gzeiras you might read Shtori and Yotis, contracts, business contracts, and do business on Shabbos. Therefore, certain matters, reading matter, is forbidden. For example, newspapers are also any kind of English books, non-Jewish books, non-Torah books are also to read on Shabbos. Definitely forbidden. An item like the Jewish press, which has a large portion of it is Divrei Torah, stories of the Gemara and so forth. Musa, that part that is Gemara and Musa may be read on Shabbos. But it's a dangerous paper because your eye is caught up by the rest of the paper, advertisements, news, which cannot be read on Shabbos. So if you can control yourself and confine yourself only to the Torah part of the paper, then it is permissible on Shabbos. And it could be done. Because there isn't that much of a taiva to read the Chazidai that's found in today's newspapers. But a person should strive to see to it that his reading matter and speaking matter should be entirely kedusha on Shabbos. Now, speaking about the Issa de Rabbanan, telling a goy to do work on Shabbos is called shvus. Shvus is speech, speaking, and a davar asur. Issa de Rabbanan. Telling a goy to do something on Shabbos for oneself is asur. What if did he ever committed a crime? He couldn't contain, so he told the guy to do something for him on Shabbos. The guy did it. The guy cooked something on the Shabbos. The guy erected something on Shabbos. Is the Jew allowed to use that item? The answer is that on Shabbos, of course, he's not allowed to. But after Shabbos is over, he must wait for the amount of time that it takes to do that. For instance, the cooking process took an hour. So after Shabbos is over, he must wait a full hour before he can use that item. In order that he does not have any hana, any pleasure out of Melacha Shabbos. When it was done on Shabbos, there's no pleasure because he waited a full hour afterwards, so he gained nothing by the fact that it was done on Shabbos. That's called B'chdei Sheyasim. He has to wait after Shabbos for the amount of time it takes to accomplish that item that was done on Shabbos by a goy. This is said only if he told the goy did it. This was private to himself and the goy. But if this was done with Fahesia, done before a crowd, everyone knows about it, then as a matter of fine, this work can never be used. It becomes also the idol. Ever, this item is forbidden for a Jew to use because there was an open crime committed with it on Shabbos. Now to tell a goy to do a malacha for himself, for the sake of the goy on Shabbos, also is also depending. To tell a goy, take this meat of mine, here's a piece of meat for you, it's raw, go cook it for yourself. This is asur to tell to a goy because of shvus. Even to say this to a goy erev Shabbos, here's a piece of meat, and go cook this on Shabbos, that too is asur. But if it's the goy's meat, tell a goy, go take your piece of meat and go cook it on Shabbos, eat it and choke on it. No, that is allowed because it's his meat, it's his cooking, it's his neck. You're allowed to tell him to go do work of his own, something that belongs to him, and something that pertains to him alone. It does not pertain to the Jew. This is permissible as far as shvus is concerned, but it is still considered in a sense the bottom of the table. Person should avoid speaking words that are not Shabbos-like. Speak about Malacha on Shabbos, even though it's nothing to do with himself, is awesome, or should not be done. Now you find this in a case where you're walking along a street on Shabbos, minding your own business, and suddenly a car stops and asks you for directions. Where should I go? Which turn should I take? On Shabbos, you tell him, go right up to the next block. And this is a Jew, Chas v'Shalom, and surely you can't say, can't lead him. This lead him or lead him. The answer is, I don't know. I'm a stranger here myself. It's a Shabbos. I'm a stranger in a world of Chilul Shabbos. But if it's a guy, then you are allowed to tell him instruction because it's his car, it's his melacha. You're allowed to say it to him. It's a matter of, actually it's a matter of Daki Shalom. However, it is still divrei chayil. Still not fit, so a person could avoid even that. It is best that he does. A person should try to confine himself to words of Kedusha. The Arizal on Shabbos spoke only Lashon Kodesh, even that which was permissible of Lashon Kodesh, to keep the words Kedusha on Shabbos. A person should retire his tongue at all times, especially on Shabbos that have both Tara and Kedusha. Shezechat the Tara and Kedusha, the Emes, the Eilam, the Wayed, that's good, we should Shezechat the Seat. Yes, go, sending a later.